Welcome back to Light in the Battle. I'm Festina, a single autistic mom raising an autistic child, healing from narcissistic abuse, and winning in court. In season 2, we talked about the long journey of emotional detachment so that we can be more impactful in court. In season 3, we talk about inner stability on a day-to-day basis. And in today's episode, I want to talk about shutdown, freeze, and dissociation being separate things, even though they can overlap. Before we get into it, I want to remind you that I'm available on Facebook at Light in the Battle. I work over DMs. I provide my help and guidance and lived experience tips and tricks over DMs, and you can reach out to me at any time. I do all of this for free at this time. All right, so in episode 1, we talked about why high conflict co-parenting is such a dysregulating environment for autistic women. In episode 2, we talked about what happens when trauma teaches your nervous system to expect danger. And today, we talk about what can happen when the system becomes so overwhelmed that it essentially can't deal anymore. I want to start with a brief reminder, because I'm realizing that not everybody knows this, a brief reminder of what we call the 4 F's in the CPTSD recovery community. There's your fight response, your flight response, your freeze response, and your fawn response. These are the typical trauma responses. These are the behaviors that you'll engage in when triggered. And they can look very different, even within the same F. So fight can mean literally punching someone, but it can be yelling, throwing things. Flight can mean physically running away, removing yourself from a situation, but it can also mean checking out mentally, staying busy to avoid your feelings, or feeling restless and driven to escape when there's conflict. Freeze can mean going blank, going nonverbal. That's a big one for me. Feeling numb or becoming physically still and unable to take action. You see how that's a problem when you're getting sued all the time or when you've got kids to raise. Fawn can, of course, look like agreeing when you actually disagree, but it's also apologizing excessively, prioritizing another person's needs, etc. So each of those 4 possible trauma responses can have a variety of manifestations and ways that they present. Now, fight and flight get all the attention. They're the ones we hear about the most. Fawning is one that we hear about a lot in CPTSD recovery communities, such as Tar-Anon. Tar-Anon is a fellowship that I talked about in season 2. It's brought to you by the Star Network. It's free. It's on every time zone over Zoom, and it's a recovery fellowship for people with CPTSD. And we hear about fawn a lot in that community, but freeze doesn't get much attention. So let's talk about that today from an ASD lens, because you'll recognize the dramatic responses: the fight, your flight, and the fawn, the yelling, the running, panicking, saying yes when we mean no. But sometimes the response is precisely nothing. You can't move, you can't speak, you can't make that phone call, you don't pick up the phone, you stare at an email for 3 hours. You know exactly what needs to be done, but somehow you can't get it done. And I want to talk about this today because if you're an autistic mom listening to this, I know that you're thinking that you're lazy or procrastinating, or you're a bad mom because you're not protecting your child. You're not doing all the things you should be doing. And I know in my case, the question that would keep coming up was, why can't I just do it? Just do it. So if that resonates with you, let's keep going. So let's talk about freeze in plain English. It's it's a trauma response. So your nervous system has perceived a threat, but you can't fight and you can't escape and you can't fawn. So what your nervous system is going to perceive as a threat could be seeing the other parent's name pop up on your phone, or just seeing their name written down anywhere. It took me years to be okay with seeing that word written anywhere. Opening an email from your lawyer, being asked an unexpected question in court, sitting in a police station when you're trying to do your report and the words don't come out, and freezing. You see how freezing can make it incredibly difficult to advocate for yourself clearly and to do all the things that need to be done for you to be impactful in court. Okay, I do want to make the connection. Freeze is really I don't want to say it's something to tackle, but it's something to really understand and give yourself a break about as you navigate all the things that your nervous system will be perceiving as a threat in your legal battle or in raising a child that is constantly perceived as a threat by your nervous system because of their disability or because you have no help and you're raising them on your own, etc. Now, here's where my autism specific perspective becomes valuable, hopefully. I want to distinguish between autistic shutdown and trauma freeze. So we talked about what trauma freeze can look like. Autistic shutdown can look like, and this is not the full list of the symptoms, but as far as I was concerned and still am when I'm under pressure, it's going to be not being able to make decisions. So you're at the grocery store and you can't decide if you're going to get the tomatoes or the cucumbers. You just can't decide. Or at work, do I handle the emails first or do I finish this spreadsheet that I have to do first? I can't decide and I'm just stuck there. It can look like going nonverbal for a period of time. So sometimes I'll be physically unable to answer someone for a few seconds to a few days. I'll be completely, shut down. That's really the word. Needing hours to recover from a situation in sensory deprivation. So I'll go to, after my autistic burnout last winter, I was able to resume having a social life very, very slowly. And it looked very, very different from the situations that I would engage in prior to my burnout when I was masking heavily. And so I do one-on-ones now in quiet environments, and I still need hours to recover from that in the dark with no sound. That can be a symptom of autistic shutdown. Not being able to pick up the phone, only communicating over text. So now when I make new friends or new connections, I have to let them know that I'm just not going to be picking up the phone, and that if they want to communicate with me and we can go actually quite deep into whatever topic, it will be over text. Not being able to eat and take care of basic needs. That's a big one in autistic shutdown or autistic burnout. And then there was also sitting in the car for prolonged periods of time instead of, walking into the transition, the next part of my day. Just sitting there frozen and shut down actually. An autistic shutdown can happen because the system has exceeded its capacity due to accumulated demands. You know how much we love demands as autistic women. Sensory input, social interaction, decision making, and uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty when you're co-parenting with a difficult person, and emotional stress. An autistic shutdown also, please know that it can be delayed. with alexithymia in particular. So you might experience those symptoms hours or a couple days or even a month after the event that took your nervous system over the edge. There's been cases where I would be unable to function for a little while and I was able to track it back to something that had happened 2 weeks before. And I just hadn't, the feelings hadn't hit yet. And when they did, that's when I went over the edge. So it's not about trying to understand what you're afraid of, what you're trying to avoid, and what triggered you. It's more about being gentle on yourself and identifying how many things your brain has been forced to process. You're not trying to identify necessarily a specific trigger or something you're afraid of that is sending you into a freeze trauma response. This is not what we're doing here. With the autistic shutdown, we want to know how many things happen concurrently or on one after the other that have gotten us into overwhelm. It's a different conversation because, as you know, as an autistic mom, you're dealing with your sensory issues. Your kid could very much be on the spectrum as well. There's noise, God forbid you're a sensory avoidant living with a sensory seeker. That's super fun. Then you've got work and all these executive functioning, all these decisions you have to make at work. If you're in a legally abusive situation, you've got all the emails from the ex that you have to be very strategic about whether to respond or not and what you're going to say and how to orient the conversation and all that. That's exhausting. You've got your court deadlines. You've got the changes in the schedule. That one is a big one with a difficult co-parent and no boundaries in place. They'll try to move the goalpost and change the schedule and ask for exceptions and all that. All the decisions you need to make. And then in the background, you're hungry because you forgot to eat. You've got all that going on. And then suddenly society says it's 6 p.m. It's time to make dinner. And that's what breaks the system. It's that straw that breaks the camel's back. You already had all these things going on that were already impacting your nervous system. And now a little thing will break the system. So now I don't believe it's fruitful to ask ourselves, okay, is what I'm experiencing an autistic shutdown? Is it a trauma response? Is it sensory overload, executive dysfunction? Or is it any and all of the above, having a party in my brain at once? There doesn't need to be, I know we love to be specific and precise and to understand everything and nerd out on everything as autistic women. But on this one, I'm going to ask that you don't necessarily look for a precise answer. There doesn't need to be one, and oftentimes there isn't one. These things interact because your reality is so heavy. Your autistic shutdown, the trauma response, the sensory overload, the executive dysfunction, and the fatigue, all of that can overlap. So in my lived experience, the trauma had reduced my available bandwidth to begin with before I did EMDR. I have 2 episodes on EMDR in season 2 that you might want to refer to. The high conflict co-parenting consumes whatever's left of my bandwidth. Autism already meant having less spare capacity for unpredictable demands. And so as a result, I would reach overload faster. And that's how I ended up in full-blown burnout last winter, autistic burnout. Now, the next concept I want to talk about in this episode, where we're asking ourselves, okay, what actually happens when the system decides it can't, fight, flee, fix, explain, cope. The next thing I want to bring to your attention is dissociation. Okay? Dissociation can it can feel like being physically present, but completely checked out mentally, far away mentally, feeling disconnected from your body. That's going to pile up with the executive dysfunction, and you're not necessarily going to feel that you need to eat or you need to sleep. Losing track of parts of a conversation, so you'll remember the beginning and the end, but the meat of it and the decisions that were made, that you've completely lost track of that. Functioning on autopilot. For moms, it's a huge one. And in my case, it looked like spending days and days and days watching dumb shows. So I don't have to feel the feels that come with what's really going on in my life. And so I don't have to take any action. It's not good. And I know I'm not the only one, so let's talk about it. Now, what's specifically dangerous about dissociation is that it's not visible. So your autistic shutdown is going to show, there's going to be symptoms. People are going to notice that you've gone nonverbal or that you can't, you're not functioning. A trauma freeze response is going to show. People are going to pick up on that. But dissociation doesn't show. So you'll look completely functional from the outside while feeling completely run down and profoundly disconnected internally. And there's a cost to that. There's a cost to that. You're appearing fine while dealing with all the things we talk about, the working, parenting, emails, court, feeding those kids, following the plan and the schedule you've created for your family with all the medical appointments and school and all that, and maybe even taking care of yourself. Who knows? Some of us do that. And you're operating from a place of profound overwhelm. And so the outside world is going to see she's coping. Like even the professionals you're working with in the autism world, well, mom is there for every appointment. The kids are always dressed clean and they look like they're fed well and they're healthy. Like obviously mom is coping. And internally you're crumbling and you've internally got nothing left. And so in my case, and I just want this to serve as a warning, between my own lowered capacity, my child's support needs, having zero help. So I've got a reduced capacity with a child that has support needs and no help, a ton of medical appointments, crazy schedule, being financially responsible 100% for everything, and getting sued by the co-parent approximately every 6 months, which is expensive as hell as well. I ended up physically ill, and that was before the autistic burnout. I went through 3 months of something pretty serious, and a lot of the women I speak to in my DMs on Facebook, they also share that they're going through disease, whether it's chronic or temporary. And so I'm hoping this episode serves as a heads up that you don't want to get to that point and that you maybe are able to identify that you're currently dissociated, you're coping, and people are going to think you're coping and you're functioning well, and they'll tell you you're so strong, but you're actually heading straight into a wall and your body will say no. There's a book about that, literally called When the Body Says No. Your body will say no at some point. Your body will disagree with the way you have to run your life. You have to run your life if you have no help and you're getting sued and you've got I don't think you chose any of this, and yet your body will say no at some point. That's something I should probably make a whole episode about, is learning to demand help. Because when I went through my physical illness thing for 3 months, that's when the people around me started thinking, oh, I guess she's not coping. And then we were able to put a plan in place where I'm getting a little bit of support. Okay. So with my obsession with gratitude and finding the silver lining in everything, which is, I know is exhausting, sorry, running myself into the ground was able to bear fruit in the sense that while I was completely unable to ask for help and tell people I was drowning, my body did it for me. People who loved me picked up on that, and now we have a plan where I get a little bit of support. Okay, so back to our topic. Why does all of this matter in high conflict situations? Because that's the backdrop for season 2 and 3. When you're frozen, shut down, or dissociated, the three things we just covered, your trauma freeze response, your autistic shutdown, or your dissociation, you're going to struggle to recall information, communicate concisely without going into a rant. You're going to struggle to make decisions. You're going to react instead of respond. You're going to have a hard time distinguishing between what is actually urgent versus emotionally upsetting and triggering your nervous system. And you're going to struggle to stay present during important conversations. And that can be court, or that can be your kid telling you about their day after school. Both are important conversations, and you may struggle to stay present. So inner stability, which is the focus for season 3, it's not a luxury for you, mom. Your inner stability is what's going to keep you functioning. All right. So follow the podcast. I'm now posting every 2 weeks. I used to make an episode every week, and then season 2 was so much work. I want to keep the quality and the consistency and how helpful it would be for my audience to the same level. And in order to maintain that, my episodes are now coming out every 2 weeks. So follow the show so that we can walk together through season 3 about inner stability. Episode 1, 2, and 3 here were really about setting the scene, understanding the reality that we live in and how it feels in a way that's hopefully relatable. Follow the show so that we can keep walking on that journey and talk about actual solutions. Until next time, wherever you're at in your journey, and especially if you're in the thick of it, remember to take this life one day at a time. Your only job today is to stay standing until bedtime. Don't look any farther. And you'll do that again tomorrow and the day after until the fog starts to lift. We'll see you in 2 weeks, Mom.